And I just want to thank BioCanRx and Sarah and Rebecca for the introduction. I really am really thrilled to be here. It's been a while since I've given a talk like this, notwithstanding because of COVID, but just many factors. I do want to say that networking is a thing that I continue to work on. So I'm I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but I do have some, I think, principles that I sort of want to share with you today. And so hopefully that will come through. So I want to ask are the slides coming through okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
And how's the audio? I've got a lawnmower or something going on outside, maybe leaf blower, but it's loud.
We can't hear it on this end.
You can't? Oh, fantastic. No. Okay, great.
You're good.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so we're going to talk about connecting the dots, and really that's just a metaphor for building your network. And I want to maybe convey on how one might go about expanding and optimizing your network and why that is important. So before we begin, and I just want to acknowledge that I too am on traditional territory, so of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. So I live in and work in Oakville, Ontario, Canada. So this is my academic path, and I just wanted to share with you this only to level set on where I've been and what I've been doing over the last few years. And you've heard this just now, really in an abbreviated form, but this is really the path that I took academically, doing an undergraduate degree in human physiology, became really interested in viruses and the immune system, and so I did a PhD at Western as well. In microbiology and immunology, and then when I went on to Mount Sinai Hospital to study signal transduction in a lab, which I'll describe in a moment. Following that, I went to a company, but during that year, I ended up doing or just a little after that, I did an MBA at the Rutland School of Business. So I want to begin, though, just talking a bit about my experience as a postdoc, and because I really think that was first time when I began to really understand the importance of networking. And I saw that manifest in my supervisor, Tony Pawson, who was a very prominent scientist. And he had this vast network of scientists, and he was able to cultivate these relationships and scientific partnerships with many different people around the world. And it was just astonishing to see how well he did that, and with a lot of grace and respect. Unfortunately, Tony passed away at a young age of 60. But when he passed away, this postdoc in another lab, who's now a professor at the University of Toronto by the name of Gary Bader, conducted an interactome. So normally you see these with protein networks, and Gary Bader is a sort of person who looks at bioinformatics. So he put this together, but this is really looking at who Tony interacted with from a publication perspective. And you can see these nodes of networks and so forth. But Tony was very well connected just simply by the people he collaborated with, notwithstanding everybody else outside of these networks. But it really is interesting to see somebody's career summated in this way. I mean, this is one dimension of his impact, but he touched a lot of people. And I think one of the things that really impressed me was that he was able to do this with ease. And how did he do that? And so some of the lessons I took away from my postdoc was that he was always open to new ideas. He would pounce on new areas of research and see how they could fit together with what was going on in the lab. He was intensely curious about people as well as what they were doing. He's very collaborative and had no issue with sharing reagents and ideas. And he looked to create mutual value with those he was working with. And that was true of collaborators, Nobel laureates, and his students at that. And he was just, again, consummate in terms of his ability to network and connect the dots. I don't think he would have called it networking but he certainly had this ability to build a community of people around the science he was doing. So I just wanted to level set with you on that. After my postdoc, I ended up in industry, and this is my industry path that led into an associate position at GlaxoSmithKline. It's one of the pharmaceutical companies that you might have heard of, but it is one of the larger ones. And I started as an associate in R&D Alliances as a part-time contract worker. So I was only there for about supposed to be there about a year in a contract role. And I can talk about the value of contract roles maybe another time. But suffice it to say that led to a full-time role because of the network I was able to build inside the company. And then I was able to take on additional roles in medical affairs. I did an MBA, which led to a role in marketing. I ultimately became a policy manager and then a reimbursement strategist within a few successive years. And then finally, after about 8 years at GlaxoSmithKline, I was recruited to go to Sanofi Pasteur, which is a vaccine company, as a director of medical affairs. And by this time, I had a fairly broad network, just to bring it back to the topic here, not only within the industry, but also outside the industry. So people who I engage with would be inclusive of researchers, scientists, doctors and physicians, government officials, and so forth. And so they'd all constitute people I engage with and interact with over time. And then recently, just last August, I was recruited to take up the head of medical affairs at a company called NOVAVAX. It's another vaccine company, and we currently have a COVID vaccine on the market in Canada, but we won't go into that. I do want to say, though, that this path was not necessarily by design. I wouldn't have predicted that when I entered GSK, I would have taken on different roles as diverse as they were, to be frank. I did have an interest in diversifying my background, and that was the philosophy that kind of might have led to this path. And it's served me well in a sense, because I've had a good understanding of the different areas of the business. And I think that one theme around diversification is one thing I'd impress upon you. And when it comes to networking, diversifying your network is something I'm going to bring up in a moment. I'm also going to talk a little about the Science to Business Network, which is sort of the physical or organizational manifestation of my interest in building a network, or in this case, a community of people who are interested in business, but came from a science background, or at least have a science-minded background, and they're interested in applying it in something other than maybe academia. So the agenda today, just to sort of jump into the actual reason we're here, I want to give you an introduction to networking. Again, this is more of a primer, although I hope there's some nuggets of interest there. I want to provide some effective approaches to networking. These may not be the only ones out there, but I do want to share with you what seems to work for me. Provide some case studies peppered throughout, and then maybe we'll do a Q&A. And then if we have time, we're going to do a little bit of a workshop at the end. And so stick around for that. So why do we want to build our network? So first of all, I think it is valuable to increase the number of contacts you have. If you've got certainly 10 contacts and they're super valuable, that might be enough. It just might be enough, depending on what your goal is. However, if you want to, again, over the span of a career, go into different areas, and you'll have different networks and different nodes of those networks, you'll want to have potentially, and in fact, you may just by virtue of living your life, you will have all these contacts. But in a professional sense, it's useful to have a diverse, not only a higher number of contacts, depending on where you're at, but also a diverse set of contacts from various different walks of life, different types of organizations, different disciplines. And this serves to expose you to new ideas. It helps foster broader understanding of not only ideas, but communities and cultures. And I think it helps facilitate creativity and innovation. So Tony Pawson, again, my postdoc supervisor, had this uncanny ability to really come up with novel scientific ideas. And I think many scientists who are genuinely creative borrow from different disciplines. And so Tony, not only borrow, but amalgamate and sort of crystallize into sort of one sort of scientific question many different trends that are happening within, say, cell biology or in computer science, in various disciplines, if you will. And the broader the contacts you have, the more diverse the contacts you have, the more interesting your ideas and source and inspiration for ideas can actually manifest themselves. I think building your network is also crucial for helping you differentiate yourself in a more, I guess, social capital perspective. This is a group of MBA students at the Rotman School. This was taken in my second year of my MBA, so probably in 2008. I took this picture looking down, and it's just the sea of black and blue, maybe gray suits. There's one person here with a white shirt. But, you know, this is a metaphor really for how resumes and people may look on paper when you're actually, evaluating candidates. And it's just this pool of people until they open their mouth, until you read the details of their resumes and their CVs. You don't really get a sense of how different they might be. And those who can differentiate themselves and can communicate the differential value they can provide over other candidates will be the ones that probably are elevated to the top of the job list. So I think having a diverse network helps diversify yourself, and also allows you to bring into a full effect the contacts you have that might actually yield a career path that you might want to pursue. So again, why is networking important for your professional development now? It helps expand the possible opportunities that might be presented to yourself. It can help expose this hidden job market, which you might have heard of. Many jobs are not necessarily posted, or they're not even in existence. Some people can actually create their jobs by identifying an unmet need within an industry and actually generate a new position for themselves. And I've seen that actually happen. It helps generate value, and specifically when it comes to networking, you're looking to generate mutual value for those who you're engaging. And it can help enhance your emotional intelligence by, again, having this broad, diverse group of people you interact with on different levels. It allows you to, I guess, practice an ability to move between social networks. And the more you understand these different networks and the people who sort of embody them, the more you can empathize with who they are, adjust your communication style, your leadership style, as well as your general approach with those groups. I think emotional intelligence is a really undervalued or maybe underappreciated by many people just starting out in their careers. But this is something that you can cultivate by, again, diversifying your group. And also, I mentioned this idea of social capital. The broader network you have, the better the relationships are with certain groups. You can actually use that network of individuals to be able to achieve your professional goals, even some personal goals, if it will. But you want to be able to do that in a way that is mutually beneficial. In other words, you're not going to be building these networks to solely feed your ego or feed your ambition. Now, there are people who do that. But we've seen that in politics very often, that some areas of politics can be very I guess maybe toxic might be a bit too strong, but You do want to, I think, in a healthy networking environment, you're looking to create mutual value. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So before you start, you have to understand who you are. I teach a course at the U of T on to these the PhD students there, and we start when we're talking about professional development. We start with a self-assessment. So that's kind of another segment of what we should be talking about. I won't be covering it today, but suffice it to say, you have to know your own personality and then evaluate your own goals and developmental priorities. You have to be deliberate and focused if you want to be efficient. You can be not so deliberate and not so focused, and that can have value too. But generally, it's useful to have a particular focus when you're going into networking situations, either a networking event or an informational interview. You want to have some level of deliberate and focused goals when you're going into those situations. And a lot of people need to change their networking mindset. I think there's sometimes among scientists, I find, a negative connotation about networking and what it means. So we'll talk a bit about that. So let's talk about a case study around changing your mindset. I want to paint a situation here because I like stories. And this is a very short story, and then none of my stories are going to be long today. But this is a story about a student who wasn't comfortable with networking. They wanted to, in fact, they wanted to avoid networking at all costs because they felt that networking was selfish, maybe that was too self-interested, and was associated with career climbing and an unhealthy attachment to ambition and so forth. So I think we need to rethink about what networking can entail, and depending on how you approach it, I think it can be very valuable, not only for you, but for the people you're engaging. And so it's less about self-interest. In fact, in my approach to networking, it's actually not about self-interest at all. It's about actually creating value for the people I'm working with or engaging, and refocusing goals around learning from others' career paths and identifying areas of mutual interest, problem solving, and value creation. And what I mean by that is by finding areas that we have in common, issues that we have a very common issue on, and then trying to identify, what are the areas that we can how do we solve this together potentially and create additional value. That's sort of next level networking, but it is really foundational to how I look at when I'm engaging with people. It's really about how do I add value to them, and how do I and hopefully there's mutual interest in working together around something. So if you take this mindset in a sense that it's altruistic, then you by reformulating questions based on genuine curiosity of who the person is you're engaging, and the desire to understand and identify opportunities to connect with other professionals in a meaningful way, then I think it takes away that idea that that networking is about self-interest and career climbing. Okay, so that's one thing that I would recommend before you begin your journey on networking, if you haven't done it before, just to change your mindset that this isn't always about you. In fact, it should rarely be just about you ever, going into these. And I've seen many people in job interviews that make the job interview about, so you ask the question, I ask the question, so why are you interested in this job? And they might say, well, I'll learn a lot. I'll be able to leverage my skills in this way, and I'll be able to, check these boxes on my career path and all this stuff about me, as opposed to I'm going to solve your problems. I'm ideally suited to solve your company's issues around whatever might be, and you've done your research. You should know those, and I've got a track record for doing this because I've done this, and this in the past. And because I've done these things in the past, and because I have people who can vouch for that and so forth through your references, you are making the case that you are suited for that position, as opposed to saying, I'm going to learn a lot from this job, which doesn't necessarily communicate to me the value you'll create for the organization you're applying for, whether or not it's a faculty position at a university or a nonprofit organization or an industry for-profit job. Okay, so let's move to where networking opportunities can occur. Well, networking is always happening. There's friends are a great first pass for your network. Even for your professional network, friends do represent a potential source for contacts. It shouldn't be your only one, and I'd be, just maybe caution people in terms of having friends always be your conduit to professional opportunities. Lest people think you might be using that friendship for professional purposes. That's a tricky subject, but you might be able to appreciate why that can have sensitivity. So be careful when you're engaging friends, but certainly it's a great source for looking for opportunities and for connecting with different opportunities. There's classmates, professors, obviously the people you might be studying with or have studied with are people who can be certainly professional contacts. And so I do make the point that when people are in university, it is a time for social engagements and fun, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you may all remember some of the activities that you might have done, and just keep in mind, people have memories about certain things, and sometimes you want to be make sure you do have a professional lens, even when you're in a research setting in a university, amongst who many of people you'd consider friends. But again, classmates and professors are still in a professional setting. So keep that in mind. Work colleagues, professional associations, networking events all represent, again, people you can connect with. Volunteer opportunities are really, really important because they give you experiential contacts. In other words, you're volunteering for an organization. They're able to see your work, and you're building a network of individuals who can vouch for your ability to contribute in a meaningful way. So when you volunteer for organizations, make sure you're creating value in a meaningful way. That is to say, you're leading projects or you're contributing to projects in a helpful manner in which people are able to say, yes, that's what they were able to do. They contributed in a very important way to this project. So look for those opportunities, and then create your own opportunities to network. And that could be many different, could look very different for many different people. I'll talk about the Science Business Network in a moment, which is a vehicle for networking. And even if one volunteers for the STBN, you're now networking with people who network all the time. And there are opportunities to build your brand and your reputation, and importantly, your experience. Okay, let's talk about informational interviews just briefly, because I think what I want to talk about is really about the actual building of that network and trying to manage the network. And informational interviews, if you're able to get the informational interview, is an important tool for you to understand people's career paths and so forth. But there are things you need to know about informational interviews, which, by the way, if you don't know what an informational interview is, it's a meeting you book with somebody whose career you might be interested in. But it's not there. You're not there to ask for a job. You're literally there to learn about what their position is and what their motivations are for the jobs, or what the benefits and downsides of the career path or the industry, or you want to learn about the industry architecture, like how does it work? How does this whole whatever job in areas would be, how does it actually how does their role contribute to the industry? So those informational interviews are really important, but I want to tell you not about what the informational interview is per se, but how you go about actually conducting it. First of all, it's critical that you're prepared. Like any interview, it's critical for you to take the time to understand who you are. Be prepared, in other words, to provide a synopsis of your background, but not a long diatribe about your life story, but really a synopsis of who you are and what you're passionate about. Articulate the objective of your interest in meeting with the individual before the meeting. Obviously, when you're reaching out to people, be very specific about why you want to meet with them in particular. And that specificity will help them understand how serious you might be in terms of meeting with them. You want to also research your interviewee, the person you're actually interviewing, their industry and their company, so that when you're asking questions, you're not asking obvious ones like, what department do you work in, or what was the what products do you work on? Like, you should know some background about what they're doing, in general, broad brushstrokes about the industry. And even the company. You can download, company reports, investor brochures. You can look up financial reports of the company and how it's doing. There's a lot of background research you could be doing. Even Googling the news that is on the company and what's happening in the industry would be useful. And then from that background research, generate a list of insightful questions. So not just yes or no questions, but questions that really probe into motivations or reasons for why things are happening, or why they've taken an approach in their career that they might have done. And it doesn't hurt to think of follow-up questions. You could do that on the fly. So it's certainly nice to have a flow of a conversation that's not totally manufactured, but actually having a free flow. But I do find it does help to think about follow-up questions so that you're not struggling in the midst of an informational interview to think of something else. Okay, well, what else would I need to say here to follow up on that point? So just think of some follow-ups. Maintain your focus, or focus on your goal. So you're there to maybe, again, you might want to understand their industry specifically. Focus on that. Make sure your questions are geared towards that. If you're focused on them, focus your questions on them. But again, avoid going off topic when some interesting point that's way outside of the topic might come up, unless it's relevant or you think it's could actually be of interest. But unnecessary tangents you should avoid, and really respect that flow of what you were trying to say. What are your objectives? Come back to the objectives and then finish what you're trying to do. There will be moments when you get new insights which you completely didn't anticipate, and you might want to tug on those strings and see where they lead. But the main point is try to stay on topic of what you're there to do. And if you can, identify opportunities to create mutual value. And again, we'll talk about why that matters in a moment. But it's a really good way to continue the conversation. If you can identify issues that you're both interested in, or that they have potential volunteer opportunities that they're working on, maybe you could help out with. But that, by identifying those issues or opportunities and being able to work with somebody, provides you a really great way to cultivate that relationship, to show that you're providing value, and also demonstrate your own value at the same time, so people could then genuinely recommend you in the future. Finally, respect the time they've provided. So be on time. First of all, get there on time and log in on time. I didn't log in today quite on time, but it's a little outside of my control. And then the ensuring you wrap up on time. So, it's tempting sometimes to go, you're having such a great conversation and it comes up to the half hour or the hour and you want to ask a few more questions. I would in generally in any meeting situation in a professional setting, punctuality on both ends is really critical, and showing that you're respecting that time is also important. So like a job interview, and I've put this slide up, and it says job interviews, but again, informational interviews are the same concepts. You are there in an informational interview to gain information and to sort of create maybe potential new opportunities. But you still have to make an impression, and there are mistakes that people make in terms of not making eye contact. It's a little more difficult virtually, I do find, because you have to stare at your camera to make that point. But as much as you can, make sure your screen is positioned so that you can actually, at least you're looking at towards the camera, as opposed to a completely different screen, which is a bit offsetting when somebody's looking at you, but you're looking at somewhere else. I find it's harder to make that connection with people. And eye contact, from a psychosocial perspective, is one of the really pivotal ways to engage people. And if you're not making that eye contact, it's a very off-putting phenomenon. 47%, so this is common nonverbal mistake: having little knowledge of the company, you're not smiling, have bad posture, fidget too much, weak handshake, play with their hair or touch their face, cross their arms over their chest, and use too many hand gestures. And 55% for the stats show that first impressions, let's see, the way you dress, act, and walk through the door, the quality of your voice, grammar, and confidence, and the words you choose to say. And again, you're in this virtual world where the quality of your voice now depends on the microphone that you're using. And I would encourage you to think about investing in at least an external mic of some sort, or at least a higher quality camera. Because again, if people can't see you and you're in the dark and you can't be heard because there's a lot of static on the line, it becomes very challenging to connect with people. So I'm just giving you these are next level sort of tips to optimize your communication over this digital medium, which I'm still getting used to. Okay, so I also want you to think about, I mentioned this idea about knowing who you are and what your objectives are. And Simon Sinek, who's this sort of YouTube star who had this video a couple of years ago, came up with this idea of the global golden circle. And at the center of the circle, he always put the question why, and then on the outer circle is how, and then what. And his point was that most companies and most people, when asked sort of what do, they start with the what and then go to the how and then the why, as opposed to companies that really start with the why and they communicate why they exist, why are they passionate about what they're doing, then they tell you how they're doing it, and then what they do to meet that passion or achieve that passion. So Apple wants to think different, and they do that by challenging the status quo, and what they deliver is a product that's beautiful and easy to use, as opposed to other companies that say, well, I've got this computer, it's got all these features and buttons, do you want to buy it? And people are less impressed with what than why. So people buy what you do, not why you do it. Why you do it, not what you do. So when you start with the why, you can at least convey who you are more easily. And that goes back to knowing yourself, knowing the value you create, understanding your audience, and then communicating your value. And this is partly when you're engaging with people in networking situations. All of these things are really important to understand, to be able to really engage people. I mean, if you don't know who you are and what you're about, and I'm not talking about what you do, but why you do it, I think it's a really important thing for you to go back and think about that before you go into a networking situation. Think about what you're passionate about. What do you love about your science or your research or your job? and then be able to communicate that before you talk about what you do. And once I had a class and everybody was talking, we were introducing ourselves, and everybody was saying, I'm a PhD student in molecular genetics. I study this, and this, and blah, blah, blah. One student I had started with, I want to change the way healthcare performs diagnostic testing, something to that effect. And I was like floored by that, because it was not the what, it was his why. Why was he studying what he was doing? It was because he was passionate about changing the healthcare system. So think about your why when you're networking and when you're conveying, who you are during a networking situation. The other thing is when you're looking for opportunities to create value. And again, when you're with people and you identify, wait a minute, this person has this problem on their hands. What could we do to create a solution? Those are great opportunities, again, for you to connect with people, to gain experience, and then finally, and ultimately network with that and create a network node who can speak to your ability to contribute and to create value. So when we talk about value creation, very often these are the types of words and sort of activities that people would associate with creating value. Value can look different in many different situations, and I wouldn't say this is an exhaustive list by any means, but these are sort of the business related value creation activities. But think about the types of things you do in your real, in your life, in your personal life, and in your professional life, on how you create value, and start documenting those in some tangible way, and then form stories around those. And stories, I mean, short anecdotes that kind of cover off what is the challenge that you're trying to achieve or address, what is the action that you took, and then what's the result of that. And that's what we call the CAR framework. CAR, challenge or context, or conflict even, activity, and then the result. And if you can communicate your resume that way, if you can communicate during a job interview about a behavioral question where tell me a time you had to overcome a conflict, you can use that framework as well. And the result of that is your creation, your value creation opportunity. That's where you've changed somebody's mind. You've influenced a decision. You've created a new organization. You've developed a new test, whatever it might be. But CAR is a really useful framework in many different settings. And again, I've got a lecture on CAR, during my normal lectures, but we can talk about that if you have any questions. So some advice when you're talking about building your network. One piece of advice I give in general is work with great people and great organizations. If you're not working with great people and you're not working with great organizations, that's okay. But whenever possible, align yourself with people who you aspire to be like. And there's a saying that, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. I think holds true. I mean, if you hang around with people who are very interested in entrepreneurship, there's a greater likelihood that network of people will elevate you and contribute to your success and as an entrepreneur, as opposed to hanging out with people who aren't involved in entrepreneurship. I think that seems obvious, but I think it's a really important concept that many people sort of miss, that they say, well, I want to start a company, but they're not necessarily aligning themselves with people who are involved in that area. Another thing is that when you're in a job situation or in a classroom situation or in any sort of professional situation, you want to deliver exceptional value to those people you work with and be their solution. Okay. So once you deliver exceptional value, you are now developing a reputation, you're developing a brand, and your brand will carry you through your network. And when you've got great people that you're working with and great organizations, and they're aware of your ability to create value and exceptional value at that, their network becomes your network. And like Tony Possen's network of people and scientists, I'm sure that at one point in my career, if I'd stayed more in the science realm, I could have called on Tony's network and said, I worked with Tony back when I was a postdoc, wondering if we could collaborate on this project. I think those barriers are easier to overcome when you've got those connections and you can move through the networks of networks. Okay, what are we talking about when I say be their solution? Well, I had a student, an M-Biotech student, this was a U of T program, who was doing an internship at Sanofi Pasteur with in another area of the company in R&D, and wanted though some medical affairs experience. So the area that I was working in. So she came up from the south end of the Sanofi campus and up to the medical affairs building and had an informational interview with me. And from that interview, she identified some of the things that I was working on. In fact, some of the problems that I was working on, and offered to work on a project. So she worked on that project. I said, sure, go. Yeah, no, it'd be great. She got the buy-in from her manager, buy-in from me. And so she worked on that project and she gained medical affairs experience and added value to the business, and also won me over as an advocate. And I thought this was one of the most, brilliant examples of networking through an experience by actually creating a new experience with me in order to gain experience for what she wanted to do, as well as to build an advocate and somebody who could mentor and support her candidacy. So after she did this, I linked the candidate into my network. I provided some job connections and provided a strong reference when she was applying for the jobs. And happily, she did end up in a consulting firm. And she's continuing to work in the industry. So anyway, that's just one example of somebody being my solution and actually building that network connection. So let's talk about approaches to networking then. When you do have that opportunity, again, understand who you are and your story. Be clear on your goals, as we've mentioned. Be positive. Demonstrate that passion for why you're in this industry or this area of research. Be curious about their path and who they are and what their motivations have been. And importantly, listen to the answers. Don't speak over people, don't interrupt people, and listen for those answers and have good follow-up questions. And sometimes we're thinking so much about the follow-up questions, we're not actually listening to what's being said. So be careful of that. Pitfall that you might come across. Identify potential common interests and values. So they may actually have an interest that you share around, I don't know, either it's a professional interest, potentially personal interest as well. And you might even have common values that you share. And those are nice opportunities to be able to kind of connect with people on. And then connecting the dots, again, is my way of saying, if you have a connection or a person you think could be of value to another person, I wouldn't hesitate to connect those dots, to be able to link people with other people within your network. And that is a very generous way of being of value. And I think I think people do remember, people they connect with. And there are people I've connected with in the past that have connected me with people I've known now in professional settings and even personal settings that I constantly, there's value being created there when I'm given that opportunity. So just an example of that, connecting the dots in my own setting, I came across a clinical scientist who wanted to understand how her research could impact policy. And she didn't know how to do that. She wasn't really into knowledge translation. So I knew people who could do that and have done that. So I connected her with another like-minded scientist and physician, and who was involved in knowledge translation policy. And the benefit for them, of course, was that they were able to link and connect. The benefit for me was that I served as the conduit for that. And I was very happy to do that. And it wasn't about expecting to get anything out of it. It's just out of the sheer knowledge that I could help somebody I was able to at least create a new connection, and they were now collaborating with each other. And it helped fostering sharing of information and ideas around translation of research to policy, which is an area that I am interested in. And ultimately, I think they appreciated the effort to try to connect the dots. So some best practices. Listen, I mean, we don't all have a lot of time in our days, and it's tricky to find that time. But making networking one of your priorities when it comes to professional development, it is very often said that many jobs are found through your own network. It's people you know who will point you in the direction of a position, or who may even hire you once they know that you're looking. So that's very critical. And I had a recent situation with somebody who realized I'd moved recently to a new role. And they said, oh, well, if I'd known, I would have recommended you for a position that was opening up in my company. And I said, oh, well, because I wasn't putting myself out there that I was looking. So if people know that you are looking, it is very possible that they might know of an opportunity. So keep in mind, again, putting yourself out there does have some risk sometimes. I mean, there's always that possibility that they might not have an opportunity, but you do have the potential for some gain. Positive framing, as I mentioned, about what networking is all about, finding those shared interests, seeking genuine understanding of people. And again, that's back to the curiosity comment that I made before, being curious about people, asking genuine questions about their background, and also being prepared, and also offer solutions. Think broadly about what you can offer, and that includes your own network, and then find opportunities to create mutual value. And as I mentioned before, start with the why. Some of the pitfalls of networking. Part of what I think sometimes happens is we tend to flock with the same feathers, if that's saying, I'm not saying that right, but birds of a feather flock together. And I think the main point is that I would encourage you to look outside your network, and you never know who you'll run into that actually completely changes your perspective or inspires you to pursue something different. So, going to different networking events. I was actually out last night at a networking function that was completely outside my own network, and it was great. I mean, I met actually a TV actor of all things, and out of a Canadian CBC show. But anyway, had a really interesting discussion, and I was able to get a video of her providing a message to my daughter, if you can believe it. So anyway, it was just a random sort of engagement, but I think that I got, went outside my comfort zone and ended up really enjoying the evening and met a lot of different types of people. So again, lack of diversity in your network is probably not a great thing. I think there's a lot of value in diversity in terms of the types of people you work with, the cultures you engage with, the types of sort of disciplines you might be reading about. So read broadly, meet people from different disciplines, reach out to people, even if they don't seem to be aligned with what you're working with. You never know. And that comes to my next point, is that having a closed mindset about who you might be meeting. I mean, you might have this impression with somebody and they might completely blow your mind about what they're into and what they're up to. So keep an open mind and be curious about what they're doing, and try to find opportunities to identify common ground, and then tease out what they might be doing that might be actually really fascinating.
Hi,
again,
Bruce. Sorry,
yes.
Before you continue, I'm just letting you know it's 2:59, so we are approaching 3 very quickly.
Oh my goodness. Okay, this went fast. This went fast. So let me wrap it up then very quickly. So making it all about you, failing to identify shared interests, and failing to respect people's time. As I end up with 1 minute left. Look, there's a few other things I wanted to talk about in terms of just connecting the dots. But I think I'm just going to end, with, the Science to Business Network is something that we created a few years ago to connect professional development opportunities for young professionals in sciences and even people with science-minded backgrounds. I think if you'd like to learn more about the STBN, go to stbn.org. We've got a LinkedIn Young Professionals Hub on LinkedIn, which you can connect with. We've got an Instagram and Facebook account, Twitter, and also you can email me after this if you're interested in finding out more about it. Final thoughts, start now, don't delay. Your network grows as you grow, so continue to work on it. Understand your goals, be curious and listen, look for opportunities to create value, get involved and create solutions together, explore outside your bubble, follow up, and then connect your dots. So we'll leave it at that. Questions? Thanks for your patience.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was a fantastic presentation. I do see one question to me. Yes, we have been recording this webinar and with Bruce's permission, but we can talk online after that. We will be able to share it with the network. Just wanted to check if there are any questions before people log off. If not, I'm also going to be putting a survey link in the chat for just a quick Google form to get feedback on today and where you want to see other webinars and what sort of things you want to see next. Yeah, are there any questions?
Can I get a question?
Yep, of course.
Really good talk. I
Hi,
think
Jim.
that's covered a lot of great information. And I always like attending these, no matter any stage of my career. I think networking is always top priority for sure. I'm curious what your advice is for those students who are trying to transition from the academic to the business world, the trainees, you know, if they've become jaded on going the PI route, where should they go next? Is it try to apply for jobs in industry, or is there a better kind of bridging gap in between? You know?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are a lot of different opportunities now to sort of shape how you approach the transition stage. So my best advice is always start early in your as early as you can to sort of determine your transition path. So even if you're in your first year of your PhD and you know there's going to be 5 years lead time, that's a great time to start building your network, understanding your value, gaining experience outside the university setting so that you can build an inventory of experiences that can be ultimately used during a job interview to convey your value. In other words, if you're volunteering in some capacity within maybe Life Sciences Ontario, like an industry sort of group, and you volunteer for that organization, you've created, you've managed projects for them, you've contributed to events and stuff like that. That all becomes good experience to say, well, what else have you done outside your research? And you say, well, I've also worked with the industry, an industry group, to put on events that showcase policy issues that are facing the pharmaceutical industry. And I've been able to create these solutions with a number of different partners. And the result has been a tenfold increase in the number of people attending these events. We've had multiple people, develop projects out of these, and that's sort of the result. So you see what I did there too. I used the CAR statement to kind of communicate the context, the actions, and the result of my experience. And because you do that, or when you do that, you don't have to tell people, I'm a good communicator, I'm a good team player, or I'm good at network building. That is all imbued within your story. And that value story is really important to be able to effortlessly communicate your value, instead of saying, yeah, what are your strengths? Well, I'm a good communicator. Well, I'd rather somebody show me through this little story about what their value is and how they're a good communicator, as opposed to saying, yeah, I'm a good communicator. Show me how that's true through your experiences. So start early, work within areas or of the industry or whatever discipline you're interested in. Try to work within those areas. And again, it doesn't have to be always those areas. I mean, showing some level of diversity is good, But if you're moving towards industry, there's a lot of nuances about how industry works that you can start learning now. The regulatory space, the business development space, there's stuff around market access and how drugs are reimbursed. So you can take courses on certain areas. And we've created a course in the Science Business Academy around the pharmaceutical landscape. There's a course at Queen's University called PHMI. It's a Pharmaceutical Health Innovation Management Program, I think it's called, and they have a course. I also teach within the University of Toronto's Mississauga program on the pharmaceutical landscape, and that's happening actually, I think it's already started, but I teach a unit on vaccines in that area. So there are things that have been developed and generated that can be done now. You don't have to wait, and they don't cost that much, really. Some of them are really quite economical. BioTalent Canada is another source for courses and materials that can help with the soft skills, as well as some things even around more technical skills like quality assurance. I think they're developing material around that. So check out all the different opportunities, but make sure you prioritize and you don't, again, try not to do it all at once. I mean, pace yourself. You still have to graduate. Some people have to put out the publications. So take your time, but the more time you give yourself, the more opportunity you can do different things, and you can switch it up every year and work on one development area and then switch it to another, and then build on your experience.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, and of course there are internships, I should say, my tax and all those types of things too, that you should be looking into. It's quite impressive, from the time I started the SGBN 11 years ago to now. The landscape has totally changed, I think, for young Canadian scientists to be able to identify opportunities. And even the fact that we've got an HQP committee within BioCanRx, and that's sort of I think, mandated feature of the NCEs, that we were able to have different opportunities like this. And these are great opportunities to network and to build your connections. So I look forward to seeing everybody at the Bio Summit in a couple of weeks.
A week. No,
it's a week.
A week out. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that long away. So I'll be there. So come up and say hi, connect the dot there, and I'll be happy to connect and just chat if you want as well offline.
And if there's time, I guess, kind of always like asking this question of people in your position, but when you went over those interview questions and errors that people make, what is a kind of number one that you see? I mean, you probably interviewed countless people too. What's the write-off right away? Someone makes this mistake and you're like, oh no, can't recover after that.
Well, there's no one way to screw up an interview. I'll just say that there are many ways to not. But I think some of the top ones I would say would be back to what I was saying, like not communicating your value appropriately and making it about yourself. So I'm going to learn this. I'm going to be able to do this. As opposed to saying, here's my background, here's why it is relevant to you, and here's the problems I can solve for your organization. Like, those are really nice ways to communicate. That's about showing you're there for them. When you're in an once you've been hired, then that's about they'll figure out how to develop you and grow you. But when you're in a job interview, you should be really focusing on how you're going to create and add value to the organization. When I was applying for faculty positions at U of T, I did exactly the same thing as I did for industry. I had, this was back when I was first interviewing, this in 2006, I had applied for a position at University of Toronto, Mississauga. And that process, you're interviewing other faculty member, you're going into their lab and you're sort of having an interview and they're asking questions. What I think they're really looking for is this person a good colleague? How is their research potentially going to dovetail with the stuff that I do? And when I was going into those and preparing for those interviews, I was very deliberate about understanding how does my research or the techniques that I used in my lab could contribute to what they're doing. It might not have always been a great fit, but at least I know where they're coming from. and they have to see me as a colleague. And it's the same thing within a job interview. What they're really asking about when they're asking about, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses, or tell me about your time. They're looking for your critical thinking skills, but also whether or not you're going to be a good colleague and somebody I can envision myself working with. Because you normally work with now this was pre-COVID and when work from home was not in it, but you'd spend a lot of time with your work colleagues. So you're in people's faces a lot of the time. So a lot of that engagement during a face-to-face interview is about the connection, the social connection you have with people, as opposed to, will they be competent in a job? Competency is only one dimension. There's that other dimension where they have to kind of like you ultimately. So be human in terms of your interactions. You can't be robotic. And I think storytelling is one of those tools. By using the ability to sort of frame your experiences through a little story provides that human level of contact, and infusing it with some emotion and sort of there's a whole sort of talk that I give around storytelling in these settings. So we can do that another time, but yeah, it's definitely important.
Thank you.
Now, we did have other questions that came through, and I know people have to go, and if you have to go, that's fine. But I know there was a list of questions that were sent to me. People were interested in networking if you're coming in from like another country or something like that. So we can address those questions if you want. I see Jason came off camera, so we'll take his question.
Hey, Bruce, great talk. Thank you for that. My question actually is one of those questions from the list, so we'll cross that off. I wanted to get your opinion on where you see finding a mentor fitting into this journey during the transition in your career moving forward.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So mentors are one piece of that network of yours, right? So they're a really critical piece because they can actually open up a whole other part of their network as well. So that's one of the pieces. So how do you find the mentor? And I want to also point out that there are sort of different levels of mentors. So there's what we call the coach, then the mentor, and then the sponsor. So a coach is really somebody you go to just for specific feedback, and your lab supervisor can be that. Your immediate job supervisor can be a coach on certain skills or things that you need to improve about yourself, and you want to have a deliberate focus on what the coaching goal is. Then you've got the mentors who are really there to support and listen to what you're doing and help you develop your own plan. They shouldn't be there to tell you what to do. That's not as effective as you creating your own plan. And if anything were to go wrong, you don't want to be blaming them for things that sort of didn't work out. I think ownership of your own plan is important, and that mentor is really critical for helping guide you in that development. But finding a mentor is not that straightforward either. And I don't know if there's any particular science behind it, but I think again, you have to be able to connect with people who either genuinely see an opportunity to help you. I mean, they're well suited to do that, and they see something in you that they can support. And I think I'm thinking of one almost sponsor that I had. By the way, a sponsor is somebody who kind of puts everything on the line for your career, who will vouch for you in many different situations. And, come hell or high water, you are the candidate, and they will stake their career on your development. And those are rare to find people to sponsor you, but you do get them sometimes, and you're lucky if you do. But let's say you get a mentor, you're trying to find a mentor. I think generally those people want to help. So people who have that phenotype, and there are people who don't have that phenotype, and that's okay. I think it's, if you can find somebody who wants to help and who genuinely does think they can help you achieve those goals, I think that's important. But setting out, ways of working is really critical when you do find that mentor. And saying, well, how often are you going to meet? What are the expectations? Coming prepared for those mentoring opportunities. Those are really important features. And then also at the end of it, saying, okay, here's what we achieved. And we were able to really, take those goals and break them down into a plan, and then you're able to achieve them over time. And then resolve that mentorship, because that mentorship relationship won't last forever, and that's okay. It happens. There are, like, we have a mentorship programs through the SGBN. That's, I don't know if it's kicked off. Sorry, I don't think we've shut down anyway. You could potentially sign up for the mentor, being a mentee, I should say, if you're looking for a mentor. And there are mentors signing up as well to be part of that SGBN mentorship program. So if you're interested in that. And I just saw on the LSCDS website, that's the Life Sciences Career Development Society at U of T, they have a mentorship program kicking off right now too. So, and I believe Life Sciences Ontario might have one as well. So these are programs that are specifically and deliberately created to set up mentorship opportunities if you're having challenges finding people in the industry that you're interested in. I think that's about all I can say about that.
That was great. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have time for maybe one more question. Just a common theme that came up in the questions that were submitted was, how do you maintain professional relationships? So say you've met someone at a conference, how do you kind of continue to make that relationship thrive? If you've been graduated from your program for a couple of years, or you're 1 to 2 years out from graduation, how do you kind of maintain these long-term networks or networking relationships?
That's a great question. And I think it's tougher as your network grows, because you end up having, and we look at our LinkedIn, I think, and think that's our network. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. It comprises part of your network, and it may be useful more as a general Rolodex of people you've been in contact with. But a true network, I think, has likely been cultivated over time, and that you're quite deliberate about who you want to engage and who you don't want to engage. And I had a mentor who has this metaphor of people who are on her bus and who are off her bus, and she'll kick people off her bus if they're not adding value to her life. And so I think that's one kind of point, is that if you have this group of people you want to stay connected with, you have to ask yourself, are you adding value? I mean, it's the same thing with friendships. I mean, are people adding to your life, or are they detracting? And what's the balance of that look like? Sometimes, people are great to hang out with, but there's liabilities associated with, being with them for whatever reason, whatever that looks like. So I think it's critical for you to kind of be, again, deliberate about who you're engaging, why you're engaging with them. And it's also important not to be inconsistent. I think if you want to maintain genuine relationships, it is a deliberate point to stay connected with people, give people a call, or at least update them with an email or a note saying, here's where I'm at. Just wanted to stay connected. Do you want to have a coffee? Or just whatever it might be. But I think that casual, I mean, it can be as casual as that, and it could be as formal as, let's go for dinner, or let's connect and see what kinds of projects we could work on together. Like, what issues are you facing right now? So it is not easy, because we only have a finite amount of time, and there's so many people I love working with, and I love engaging with, and I love seeing on a routine basis. But I find as your career progresses, as you've got family kind of commitments, as you've got other things going on, it gets tougher and tougher to maintain those relationships. So I think in that case, prioritization is really key. And being then, okay, here's the people I'm going to definitely connect with this year, and how that looks is really up to you. But I'd say it does take effort to just maintain those.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bruce. And again, thank you for an absolutely wonderful presentation. I know I learned a lot. I hope all of you did too. But yeah, I think that is going to be it for today. Thank you all for joining. Again, that link to the feedback form is in the chat, but I will follow up with all of you via email afterwards.
And maybe I'll just add that if
Absolutely.
anybody wants, if you don't have a LinkedIn account, try to get a LinkedIn account and then look up, and I think they've got courses on LinkedIn on how to, in fact, that's a great repository for information, but set up a good LinkedIn site, connect with me, connect with people in the BioCanRx community. And that's a really great place to start if you're just sort of getting started. And then I'll see you a couple of weeks too. So hopefully we can. Oh, and by the way, if you do connect on LinkedIn, though, try to add a note saying where you saw us or where we all met. So there's context. Appreciate that. And thanks, Rebecca and Sarah, for your invitation today.
Thank you.
Hey, amazing. I think that is it. So again, thank you all for coming, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Okay, bye, folks.
Bye now.